I need every minute we can get.
Mhm. All right, well, welcome everyone to our Soar Growth Series, which is brought to you by Soar Marketing Society. For those of you who are not yet members, Soar Marketing Society is a private, free community for B2B marketers to help elevate their impact. We do peer networking, we do bi-monthly events, including the one today. We share articles, we have a weekly newsletter, but the whole mission is for us to help marketers gain more credibility and make a bigger impact with their peer group, with their C-suite, and learning how to build relationships across kind of the leadership team so that marketing is seen as a valuable function within the company. If you are not yet a member, you can join by going to soarmarketing.club/soar. So today's topic is all about fresh perspectives in B2B branding. Alex, can you go to the next slide real quick? And I'm excited because we have two speakers that are wildly named the same first name, Christian Dagobi and Christian Kleb. And I think this is gonna be an interesting discussion because Christian Dagobi has spent the last almost 20 years on the client side. So he brings kind of that client perspective of helping companies build brands. And he just started a new role where he's literally going through this process right now with his organization. So I think he's gonna have some real life advice and insights to add. And then Christian Klepp is coming really on the agency side. So he works with clients to do this for them and has some really great experience in helping clients. So I'm very excited. We had, this is especially really great timing because I don't know if you guys saw that LinkedIn just published some research that showed why branding is so important in B2B. It's often a neglected function of marketing, but I loved this stat that I saw that said, 95% of your buyers are not actively looking for a solution right now. And so really we spend a lot of our marketing budgets trying to get that 5%. And they said that there's 92% of marketing budgets are aimed at trying to go after that 5%. And so, you could see how the imbalance is really off here if we're not showing up as to how buyers are actually buying today. So, and branding is really the foundation of that. And so I'm excited for you guys to learn a little bit more about how to do that from these two gentlemen today. So welcome, Christian and Christian.
Thank you very much, Stacy, for having us.
Thank you. Great to be here. Okay, so I'm gonna share my screen. Just give me a second. Okay, everybody see that okay?
Yep.
Yep, okay.
If you could just put it in slide mode, of course.
I'm just about to do it. All right. Okay. So welcome everyone. Thank you, Stacy, for that introduction, and welcome to this webinar/workshop. So my name is Christian Klepp, and I think just for the sake of everyone's sanity, we're just going to refer to ourselves as CD and CK, all right, because we have the same first name. So I'm the co-founder and director of client engagement at I'm Like Consulting, based in Toronto, Canada, and I'm joined today by Christian Dagobi, who's the marketing director over at Spruce Technology. So we're going to talk about, as Stacy mentioned, and thank you for setting that up, we are going to talk about a topic that is thankfully getting a little bit more airtime now in the world of B2B than it previously got. And that's building a B2B brand in the sea of sameness. So let me just ask you, the audience today, like how often in the past have you heard comments like this, all right? So we're going to work on branding later down the road when we make more money, we generate more revenue. Second one is, branding. Now, we don't need branding. We've got a logo on a website, so we're good. And the third one, which is my favorite, is we don't need branding. We have our salespeople, right? So nothing against salespeople. I think they're an important part of the ecosystem. But today, we're going to try to dispel some of these misconceptions, also walk you guys through the steps of what actually is required to help build a strong B2B brand, okay? So this is what we're covering today, and hopefully we'll get through all of it within the allocated time. So the first one is the importance of B2B branding and how that relates to such things that are important to the business, like, for example, lead generation. Number 2 is checking the pulse, which basically means before you initiate any brand building activity, how do you conduct an analysis of your current situation that you have some kind of benchmark, right? And point number 3 is a very challenging one. And I think with Christian or CD and my collective experience, we will walk you through what it requires to build that case internally for brand building that will get everyone to a yes, right? And to get everyone on the same page. Oh, I'm sorry, was there a question? All right, and number 4.
What language was that?
I think that was Arabic, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay.
Yeah, don't quote me on that. Point number 4 is the B2B brand building process and the different facets of that. And number 5, I think, is extremely important, right? Because you can't initiate all of these initiatives without actually providing some kind of results, right? So off we go. So the importance of branding in B2B. So let me just highlight that importance with this illustration or with this photo. Imagine building a house and you don't have an architect's blueprint and you skip building the foundation. It's a little bit of a scary proposition because if you don't have the blueprint, then how will the construction team know what the house is going to look like when it's done? Right? They might have the skills, but they need somebody, they need a blueprint, they need a guideline, right? Because otherwise you're going to end up building a Frankenhouse, right? And if you skip the foundation, right? And I think this is something that people in North America can relate to. If you don't have a strong basement, what's going to happen in the winter? Except in Florida, it'll flood. It'll flood and the house will collapse. And it's the same in branding, right? Because in branding, it's like, that's what happens to companies that go about rolling out these initiatives without having that blueprint and that foundation, right? So they skip straight to the tactical and execution-driven activities, right? And those will end up with generating results that may not be very favorable. So that's one, but that's one component to the importance of having a strong brand. Here are a few more. And just as this illustration highlights, right, the blueprint, right? There's a few things, and Stacy mentioned one of them already. Strategic differentiation and increasing visibility. Now, I know that when we say B2B industries, I mean, B2B industries can be very broad, but like some of the companies that I worked with in the past were in extremely competitive industries, right? So steel, construction, there is so much competition. How are they going to get their customers to choose them over the next vendor, right? So it's strategic differentiation beyond the products, beyond the solutions. What else can they deliver that will position their companies differently? Which leads to number 2, helping the prospect to choose you and the lead generation. And we'll get into that a little bit further later on about how complex many scenarios are in the B2B buying process. And the sales cycles, they tend to be long. They tend to have a buying committee consisting of at least 6 to 10 people from different functions that all need to collectively make a decision on who to move forward with. Right? Number 3, helps with talent acquisition. So at least in North America, from we've heard this term a lot, right? The great resignation, the great reshuffle. People are looking for jobs, right? What would make that potential applicant, that potential candidate choose your company over another? What would attract them to work for you? Certainly not that we have a ping pong table, right? Point number 4, serves as a blueprint for all marketing activities and initiatives, as I mentioned before. And point number 5, based on also what Stacy mentioned and what I've also been reading on LinkedIn. In many cases, 95%, up to 95% of prospects are not actively buying. They're not looking, they're not ready to buy right now. And you'll see it later on when we talk about it, but they have to go through this process of research and verification and supplier identification. And that can take several months. So during this period, what can you as a company and with your brand building initiatives do to build up that trust and that credibility, because that takes time. Foster those relationships, which ultimately will lead to a transaction or a deal closed, and loyalty. And number 6, branding is a long-term investment. If any of you are investing in stocks, you know that this is not something you can cash out after 2 weeks. It takes time, right? Or any other analogy that you want to use. Okay? So if we're talking about branding and lead generation, I just want to highlight this diagram, which is from a very interesting article or report by Gartner on the B2B buying journey. Now, this is not to say that they're all like this, but it gives you a rough idea of what many are contending with. And it's not linear, right? It doesn't go, okay, step 1 is this, step 2 is this. Many times, if you see in this chart, they tend to go back. They tend to go back and get further verification. And there's some, I want to point these out because this is something evidence to further illustrate my point. But downloading white papers, independent online research, web search, LinkedIn discussions, peer discussions, consultation, virtual demo. All of these things are part of that journey. And a lot of these touch points are where you as a company can help to reinforce that brand and that brand building with what you provide. So in other words, and I know I'm skipping ahead here a little bit, but when they Google you, what are they going to find? Right? So just keeping that in mind, right, as we are talking about the buying journey. So some other interesting topics or points that this report highlights, which I want to raise here. So that first point, 77%, what does that stand for? That 77% of B2B buyers, at least the ones that were surveyed, claim that their most recent purchase was highly complex or difficult. And this is something I have almost no doubt with all the organizations and even your customers that you work with, a lot of them will say that finding that right vendor is not a walk in the park. It is a process that runs over several weeks or months, requires consultations with several parties, right? Which goes to point number 2, which is B2B buyers have to complete a set of jobs to make a purchase. So I'll give you an example. Like when I was working with Caterpillar, right? It wasn't as simple as, okay, we're going to do a website revamp for Caterpillar. We had to go through their process where they had a needs identification process, and then an RFP development process, and then verification with the vendor. So I had to jump on a call with 6 or 7 different people across different functions to verify that I was the right vendor, right? The buying journey isn't linear. Case in point, back to the slide on the previous page. And 4 and 5, the right information makes purchasing decisions easier. That kind of sounds pedestrian, but it's interesting to see how many companies don't do that. And what that really means is how can you get the client or the potential client's procurement team and all these other stakeholders who are making that decision, how can you get them closer to choosing you, right? And suppliers need to help buyers to complete their buying jobs because, okay, so how can you get them to choose you over all the other vendors that they are taking into consideration, right? So based on these realities that I've highlighted, there are some questions to consider, and they're by no means limited to this list. How can companies help to make the buying committees work easier? When they research you or your company online most of these days, or if they ask their friends in peer groups and online communities, what answer are they going to find? What do you want to convey to these B2B buyers that will help you to stand out and will make this decision a no-brainer for them? And what will make them ultimately choose you? But in the interim, before they get to that yes, how will you nurture those prospects so that you build that trust and credibility with them? Right? Okay, before we go on to the next section, any questions at this point? Nope. Okay. So we've covered the importance of branding, and we go to checking the pulse. And what does checking the pulse here mean? It basically means you are checking on the overall health of your brand, the current situation of your brand, because that gives you a benchmark to work off of as you are trying to go into brand building and ultimately marketing activities, right? So the way that you do that is through a brand audit. Now, please don't be alarmed by the picture of the surgeon, but it kind of does feel that way sometimes, right? Because what you're trying to do, and I like to use this this analogy or this comparison, that when you're not feeling well and you go to the doctor's clinic, does the doctor prescribe you immediately with medication? Most likely he or she doesn't, right? What do they do instead? They ask you, okay, Stacy, oh, you've had a cough. Okay, so for how long, right? Has it been intermittent? Has it been dry? And they'll ask all these bunch of questions to determine what the problem is before they provide you with some kind of prescription, right? And that same approach needs to be used when you're conducting a brand audit to determine what the challenges are, where are the gaps, where you stand. And this is important, internally and externally, because I've seen some companies only do an internal audit and they're like, yeah, we're good. But then when you talk to the clients, it's a different story, right? So it's always important to get both sides. So why do you need a brand audit, right? As I said before, it's a good starting point because it helps you benchmark against the current situation to determine what the challenges are, where are there opportunities, and how can you improve moving forward. And it gets rid of the guesswork, which we all know is gonna be a highway to nowhere, right? So that's the part on why a brand audit is important. Now, what is a brand audit, or what does it consist of? I'm going to try to be very succinct and to the point here as possible, because this is one of those topics where you can just go on and on and on. But essentially, a brand audit consists of three components, right? You have the brand inventory, you have the brand exploration, and you have analysis and synthesis. So brand inventory, as the name suggests, is you're doing an analysis of the current marketing assets and anything that is brand specific, right? So, and that basically you split into what is called a situation issue, a product issue, and a customer experience and communications issue. So situation issue, you can ask when you're conducting interviews, you can ask questions like, okay, so what is the single most important challenge of the brand right now? One of the most common answers would be low awareness, right? Which is a good reason to do brand building. Product issues, you can ask questions like, okay, what is your pricing signal about your brand and where your brand currently stands, right? Because if you have a premium positioning and you have high brand awareness, that generally tends to be a positive situation, right? If you have low brand awareness, but you still try to command premium pricing, you might have a bit of pushback there from potential prospects, right? Then the third part about communication and customer experience. So one classic example that I've seen when I've conducted these audits in the past is that the communications or the messages across different channels are inconsistent. And when they're inconsistent, that is a clear indication that there is no proper alignment, that in many times, especially in larger organizations, people tend to work in silos, and that's something that needs to be fixed, right? So that's, in a nutshell, brand inventory. So I've just like summarized 10 years of branding into like 5 minutes. But brand exploration, and Christian will touch on this later on, or CD, excuse me. Brand perception survey is part of the brand exploration. So this is basically to determine the customer, your current customer's perception of the brand. So things like, okay, what is the overall likability of the brand? And when you think about our brand, what are some of the words that you use to describe that? Something of that nature, right? And the last point is analysis and synthesis, which basically means, because I can tell you right now, I'm not going to lie, after these brand audits, you're going to have an incredible amount of data and information at your disposal. So I think the challenge here is to try to make sense of that data and to frame things properly in a way that you can prioritize what issues need to be addressed, what gaps have been identified, but also which opportunities you see based on this audit that you can use to help build your brand in a positive way, right? So going from that over to CD for the brand perception survey.
Yeah, thanks for the segue. Go ahead.
Yeah, real quick, I had a question back on the audit. Have you found like a good tool, or are you creating surveys, or, does something exist that just keeps the questions consistent between these different parties so that you have a real benchmark that you could then maybe go back and test 6 months or a year later?
That's a great question. So we've basically been developing our own surveys, and there's different platforms out there also to use that. But basically we try to use survey. It's a combination of surveys and also in-depth interviews with customers, right? So there is in fact a qualitative aspect of this too.
Got it. Okay, thanks.
Christian, good start. Thank you for the segue. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about the brand perception survey right now, and we're going to go over 4 aspects of what you want to cover in that brand perception survey. And I just want to point out real quick that I've done them mostly in my career internally, where I'll develop a brand perception survey internally, highlighting asking the right questions of the 4 main tent poles that we're going to get into in a second, or hiring external firm like Christians to do that brand perception survey for you, where they distribute it, they report on it and stuff like that. But getting to the brand perception survey, it's so important for a company to know and to understand how their target market views them today versus how the company wants to portray themselves or how they think they're portraying their brand out in the marketplace. So very, very important to understand what they're thinking and see if there's like any disconnect there beside from what your customers think and what your company's trying to do. And having that firsthand party information directly from your clients as opposed to thinking all of this stuff. And a lot of times it's guessing. You're talking to your internal people and you're executing strategies and tactics and brand strategies, and taking that guesswork out with firsthand party data, very, very important. Important to measure your brand, like Christian had said before, regularly, but it does take time. I'm a big fan of doing benchmarking where you're at today and then doing one in a year, because it takes time for that messaging and that perception to change out in the marketplace. So that's why I usually like to wait a year. If you could go to the first brand tentpole, Christian.
Oops, yeah.
So the first part of it is cognitive part of it. So these are the concepts that are associated with your brand. These are what your clients think of you when they think of you, strictly from a logical perspective, nothing with the heart. So some questions you might want to ask, like, when you think of our brand, what first comes to mind? When I say IBM to anybody, immediately they're going to think powerful, legacy, dependable. When I say Harley Davidson, in B2C, immediately you think of the biker, being on the road, freedom, that image. Does your company, what are they thinking when somebody mentions your company? What do they think? I'm assuming if they're thinking, about your B2B brand, do they think about trust? Do they associate fun with your brand, or do they think you're serious? Do they think you're helpless? Do they think you're cutting edge? Do they think you're confusing, boring? Does nothing pop up in their head? And that, nothing is dangerous. Collecting their feedback on what they think is important. The second tent pole is emotional. So this isn't the mind, it's the heart. And it's so important today for B2B marketing. And I think it's getting better, but to include emotion in your brand today. And when you do that, you're not talking about your products and services, you're telling stories that pull at the heartstrings, if you will. So some of the questions that you want to ask there on an emotional side, are you more likely to consider solutions from companies, that they understand and feel connected to? Are buyers more apt to buy from companies like that? What kind of feelings do you experience? I gave that Harley Davidson example. I think that's a great experience. But whatever it is, it's very, very important for any brand, a B2B brand, to evoke some sort of emotion today. Obviously, preferably positive, but it's very important to strike some sort of emotion, because if there's nothing there when they think about your brand, that's a big problem. So the next portion, the next tentpole is language. How great would it be? How great would it be to be a fly on the wall in your client's conference room when they're talking about you, or being invisible? That would be my number one superpower to have, is to be invisible, to hear what they're saying about your brand, to see how they talk about your brand to a colleague or a peer or a friend or whatever. What are they actually saying about your brand? Are they saying that, that your website matches match the expectations when you actually spoke to somebody at your company? Are they saying it's easy to do business with your company? Are they saying that you're cutting edge? Are they You know, are they saying that your company, you know, is creative, that they bring creative, you know, they bring creative ideas to the table to my challenges that nobody else has thought of. I think that's awesome. You know, so you want to know what people are actually saying about your brand. The last one is action. Christian mentioned the 77% number at the start of the PowerPoint. You know, it's complexity. And that didn't surprise me, that number. You want to give your clients a complex experience, especially during onboarding, where you don't get a second chance to make a first impression. And you need to know this. And you might hear it from sales might hear it from your clients, but to collect it in a brand perception survey that you can slice and dice that data that you get, you know, a million different ways, by industry, by company size, by how many years they were a client, their NPS score. This whole action question is related to NPS. How likely you recommend this to a colleague or a friend or a colleague? So I think it's very important to include these 4 tent poles in your brand perception survey. And like I said, knowing the results of these, you know, will help you better portray your brand out in the marketplace. And it gives you, you know, a way to benchmark where you're at today and doing this in a year from now to see how you move that needle.
Okay.
Can everybody hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay, somebody couldn't. But anyway, yeah, so very, very important, you know, the brand perception survey, to get your clients' feedback instead of doing internal guesswork.
Thank you, CD. All right. So we get to the bit after the brand perception survey where we're talking about the symptoms, right? So what are some of the signs that your brand needs an upgrade or a refresh? And I'm going to go through the first 5, right? So one of them, just feeding off of what CD just said. So poor results of the brand perception survey. So what does that actually tell you besides, you know, low brand awareness? It actually highlights your current weaknesses, right? And what areas you can improve. And it also helps you to determine or understand what is not working in terms of your messaging, your positioning, and your value proposition. And it will help you to determine why and what you can do about it. Point number 2, client and prospect feedback. And I think, at least in my experience, this has been extremely useful. And when I say feedback, I'm also talking about the negative feedback, right? You know, if the clients and the prospects have good things to say, fantastic. But the ones that are not having a good experience, or the ones that are providing negative feedback, it's also important to understand why, right? Or where that's coming from. So if you have feedback from existing clients, that will generally help you to understand what your strengths and weaknesses are, and will give also some validation towards what you're doing. Prospects, I think, is a different situation. And why? Because these are companies that have not worked with you yet. So it gives you a gauge of how high or low your brand awareness is. And I think another one, which is equally interesting, is how you stack up against the competition that you have out there, right? And also, what opportunities do you have to build that trust and credibility? Because can the prospect determine from your discovery call what your level of uniqueness is versus the competition, as an example, right? Difficulty in closing new deals and losing a high percentage of competitive bids. So let's appreciate that it's not only about branding in that situation, okay? There's several factors that come into play there, right? Whether it's the product or the services, the team, the account servicing team, the pricing, the approach, etc. But I would also argue, and evidence has shown, research has shown, that one factor is also the level of brand awareness, right? If they are able to determine who you are and that level of trust and credibility. Point number 4, your business model has changed, and we've got a couple of examples later on in the presentation to show that. So if your business is going in a different direction, and well, that sounds like something we've heard a lot in the past 2 years, right? Like businesses shifting gears, going in a different direction, migrating online digitally, shutting down one business function, opening a new one, right? So how does that impact the overall perception that the market will have of your company? And in a situation like that, a brand upgrade or a refresh might be a plausible solution to help to reflect that change in direction. And point number 5, staying current with the times. So what do I mean by that? Like, you have to show your customers, your partners, your employees that you are a company that is evolving with ongoing changes in the market and ongoing market dynamics. I think the easiest example is like if you have a website that looks like it was built in 2001 and it was never upgraded ever since, and it's not responsive, well, then it's time to change that, right? Over to you, CD.
Yeah, indeed. Good stuff, Christian. Covering a couple of more that are warning signs that you want to rethink about your brand shifts in the target market. Just a good quick example for this is at a past company for our companies worked for a few years ago for our digital CX advisory services and platform. We had been traditionally targeting chief technology officers and chief financial officers. And we started noticing more HR titles going to that web page and visiting our social media accounts and inquiring about information and filling out lead generation forms on our website. And we couldn't figure it out. Like, why are they interested in this? So I had the opportunity to speak to a couple of these HR managers, and they were looking, to provide a better onboarding, a digital onboarding experience for their new employees through having to do all that minutia, when you're a new employee, signing forms, registering for your 401k and everything like that. Theirs was kind of archaic at the time. So they wanted to revamp their digital experience. That completely changed how we started marketing that particular digital CX advisory services and platform to incorporate more of that shift in the target. Obviously, the addition of new products, services, or solutions. For example, I like to give examples. I learn best like that as well. But say you have like a company that specializes in cybersecurity solutions and platforms, and that's all they do. They want to expand their product line. They want to grow their market base. So they launched a new database management tool or platform. Makes sense, right? A lot of what we do in cyber today is protecting data. So that company would want to rebrand themselves or refresh their brand to not only portray that they're a cybersecurity company, but they're kind of like an end-to-end solution that we not only have the solutions to guard your data, but to manage it as well. Entering a new market, I've worked for a lot of companies that were regional in the United States, where their website, everything, content collateral was, they're in the Northeast and everything, had a New York City skyline and stuff like that. And somebody from Texas isn't going to like that. Somebody from Florida is not going to get it. That's not going to resonate with them. So as we grew into new markets, we got rid of unless it was a campaign landing page for a specific region, but we got rid of all regional imagery all over our site. Our content changed. So we spoke to a broader audience instead of just the people in the Northeast. So entering a new market in other regions, because there's so many subcultures in the US. And then also, of course, like if you're expanding into completely different, countries and stuff like that, you have to be aware of cultural differences there as well and how you brand your company. I think Christian, I mentioned this before, attracting new talent. Like today, as we all know, with the Great Resignation affecting a lot of different industries, so hard to keep talent today and to attract new talent today with the labor shortage that's going on today. I read something really interesting a couple of weeks ago. A Glassdoor study found that applicants were 40% more likely to apply for a company that they knew or had heard of. So if your company isn't resonating, or you have no brand awareness out in the marketplace, or they don't think much of you or negatively, or don't even know you, you're losing out big time. That's a big thing Christian spoke about, is why you want a good brand today, is to attract and retain new talent. And then finally, you're in a lot of trouble. I think we left this for number 10. If you're having difficulty coming up with how your brand is different today. I've held and led full day, half day brand differentiation, value proposition meetings with several, across several different departments, where all we would brainstorm about is and whiteboarded out was how our brand was different. Maybe that was a SWOT analysis, and we would brainstorm. If you're done after that exercise and you're still not confident and you're still not sure what your brand, how's your brand different in the marketplace, that's a big red flag. Probably time to hire a brand consulting firm like Christian's. So those are some of the wake-up calls that you might want to refresh your brand.
Okay, thanks, CD. So
you're welcome, CK.
So we've gotten to the point now where we've talked about the importance of branding and how to check the pulse and some of the symptoms that indicate that your brand needs an update or a refresh. So let's get going with the brand building activities. But this is the part where I go, not so fast. You need to get approval first, right? And so, at least in my experience, and I'm sure for those of you in the audience here, this is probably one of the most challenging parts of this entire exercise, is actually getting that internal buy-in and getting that internal approval, getting everybody on the same page. It might seem logical to us, but not so for our non-marketing colleagues. So this section, I think, is quite important because we're going to walk you through, again, CD and my collective experience about how to build a case internally for brand building. All right, CD, off you go.
Yeah, thank you, Christian. Starting off by saying securing an internal buy-in, especially from people who don't get marketing, probably the most challenging aspect of everything that we're talking about here today. Unless you're lucky enough to work for a company who your CEO is a former brand manager or CMO, they think differently.
Highly unlikely in B2B.
No. Unfortunately,
yeah.
You're likely to get pushback in a lot of different questions. CEOs think, like Christian said, they think, and I think it's a part of it for sure. Your logo, like Christian said, we have a logo, we have a website, we have some social media channels that we're good. But that's not good. That's not good enough. That's not about being a brand. So I was going to get to the conversation later. So some tips that I've used in the past to get internal buy-in: before going to the CEO or the C-suite and setting up a meeting with them and taking precious time out of their day, start small. Start with your internal marketing team and start getting support for a brand build from scratch or a brand refresh from your team. So strength in numbers here is definitely applies. And you're going to your CEO in that meeting with one or two of your colleagues, or your other colleagues are also sending out smoke signals, to the C-suite about the importance of building a brand and why we need to. So start small is definitely a big recommendation, and get support internally. So your CEO doesn't say, "Oh, there goes Christian again with another one of his nutty ideas." Very powerful. When we develop case studies for our clients, that resonates a lot with them. And the same thing with your CEO. There's so many B2B branding, successful B2B branding case studies out there on the internet. Leverage them, preferably within your industry. But that is so powerful to show your CEO, "Oh, look at our competitor over here, or look at the person in this space over here. They went through a brand build. Look at how it increased their business. Why aren't we doing that?" Third, reveal the results of the brand perception survey. More likely than not, there are going to be things that you need to work on, about your brand across any of those four, maybe all four of those tent poles that I spoke about earlier. So it's hard to argue with numbers and thoughts and opinions from your clients. Again, really, really powerful there as well. Showing the metrics and benefits of a strong brand reputation and brand equity. Christian, I think, mentioned it. If you have a strong brand equity today, you can charge a premium. I've worked for a couple of big four firms before, and there's really no difference between the services they provide in second tier accounting firms. There really isn't. But they have that brand reputation equity where they can charge a premium. We can get back to the example of attracting and keeping more talent. Research and reveal on your competitor has kind of touched on this before, but you want to highlight anything special, different, unique your competitors are doing. A new program, they developed, a new video series that's getting a lot of chatter on social media. So showing, I think, is really powerful. That's convinced a lot of the C-suite executives that I've worked for, was to show them, look at all these cool things that they're doing for their brand. Look. And then the last point, don't be shy. I mean, the point is here, like, don't be afraid to speak up to your C-suite. Don't be afraid to point out negative things that need fixing for your brand or need to be built from scratch with your brand. I mean, you were hired for a reason. You have experience, you have expertise in this area. They should trust you, when you talk about marketing and a brand. So don't be afraid to speak up, and do not be afraid to point out negative things that need fixing.
I'm going to just throw one thing in there, CD. I think that's a good point. Don't be afraid to rock the boat, but to a point that I think Stacy and I discussed in a previous occasion, especially with C-suite. If you want to rock the boat, you better be sure you can back it up with research, right?
Yeah.
And evidence, because otherwise, bam, they're gonna snuff out that flame.
Absolutely. I think I kind of go into that on the next slide. Doing your research, but having to have that persuasive C-suite conversation. When I talk to any CEO I talk to in my career, what's our ROI on this purchase?
CD, sorry, there's a question.
Go ahead.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Nasimul. I'm from Bangladesh. Basically, I'm in B2B sales for last 14 years. I think all of your last points are very good. You can add one more thing, that you can consult with your sales team.
For sure.
Absolutely.
You are the first person to burn out with the customers. So without consulting with them, you won't be able to know what's really happening in the market.
Agreed. Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely.
And that is a big piece of the puzzle in doing the research that Christian had mentioned. Consulting with yourself, absolutely, should have been on that list. Very, very important to get their feedback. I would argue, but that is just one piece of the puzzle, is to collect their feedback, because they are not having the conversations that brand and marketing people would be having with their clients. They're not sitting down and asking them, hey, what do you think about our website? What do you think about our brand? How does it make you feel? Salespeople don't have conversations like that with clients. So yeah, I would definitely, it's good to talk to salespeople. But again, just a small sliver of the research that you need to do.
Thank you for your question, and thank you for joining us. It must be really late your time.
Yeah, it's late. It's late. Thank you.
So yeah, so really quickly, we are at securing internal buy-in and having that tough conversation with the C-suite. I was talking about every CEO, CFO, all they want to know, what's our ROI in that purchase? What's, what do we, how quickly are we going to start, showing revenue from this purchase?
Right.
Where's the data to back it up? What are we going to, how is this purchase going to, what are we going to look like in a year from now? So you really have to talk their language, because CEOs are more about, talking about, they're more about sales, about business solutions, about ROI, and they don't connect that brand pushes all of that and can make everybody's lives easier. They don't go there. Their mind does not go there. So that's to make a persuasive conversation and report to your CEO, you need to think like them and provide both qualitative and quantitative metrics in doing your research. There's a lot of stats out there, that reveal that companies that have a good brand reputation out there, that have like a clear story, a clear narrative, are 20%, B2B buyers are 20% more likely to buy from companies like that. And to show those types of metrics, there's a lot of metrics like that out, in different studies on B2B branding, and using that, and using those metrics to make your story, and challenging your C-suite, obviously in a respectful, professional way, but challenging them on their way of thinking. So that's how I approach my conversations with the C-suite. You know, it works. Like Stacy said, I'm in the midst of building a marketing department right now from scratch and building our brand. And, you know, I'm fortunate that our CEO gets it, the importance of brand building, and is ready to invest the time and the resources to build brand awareness and perception out in the marketplace. And you just have to think like them and talk their language.
Thank you. Just very quickly, Stacy and Alex, how are we doing for time? Because we're about halfway through.
Oh, yeah. Okay. There's like 12 minutes left in our
All right.
Yeah, we want
session. So maybe you guys want to skip to some
we
the
want to
meat.
be like the Flash and just go.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Pick your good ones.
Okay. So
Thank
just
you.
very quickly on. Thank you, Stacy. All right. Okay, Chris. Okay. Time crunch now. So what can you do to ensure a smooth brand building process? I mean, now that you've gotten the buy-in, what do? You need to take the lead, and by you, I mean the marketing people, right? Clearly, it helps to have the right plan and the brand strategy in place before you initiate all of this. So we're going back to what I said in the beginning about the foundation work. Make sure you have enough budget, which almost goes without saying. And when I say identify your team, that doesn't necessarily just mean your marketing team. We're talking about all the key stakeholders internally that you need to get a sign off from, right? And reviewing feedback from them and getting alignment to make sure that everybody's on the same page. You want to avoid a decision by committee scenario, right? And the way that you try to avoid that is by taking the lead and guiding everybody, right? And obviously having the right partner, whether that's somebody externally or and so forth. All right, off we go.
Yeah.
So the meat, the climax, the brand building process.
Yeah, you know, in sake of time, can we skip to the next slide? I think it's a little bit more valuable. So just some quick wins, like if you have never done branding before, you've never tried creating awareness, you've never tried developing a persona, influencing perception, really quick things that you can do to create awareness and build an affinity for your brand and really tap into the emotional side of your brand fairly quickly. I'm saying, like, you know, all these things you could do here within a month or two, but you know, huge fan of video for telling, you know, stories. You know, tell your company story, you know, via video with senior level executives, employee spotlight videos, have your employees tell your story for you in like a 1-minute video. Where if you go to the Spruce website right now, it's something that started at Spruce, and it's gotten in our history the most views and engagements in any other post we've ever done. You know, it's just a 1-minute video about what it's like to work for Spruce, what their challenges are, what they're doing. Awesome. Bring your employees into it. SME videos, tell a story, kind of going into what we said before via video, but like anything written, forget about your products and services and talking about that. Why not write a story about how your CEO started the company? What made it? What made him start it? What was it like when you were driving to your client that first day? What was your first year in business like? What is it? You know, what was that like, and what does it look like now? Write about your vision and mission, how you're going to change lives. Anything but your products. People don't want to hear it. One of the real quick, David Meerman Scott, one of the best lines he has: nobody cares about your products except you. And it's true. You want to create an emotional connection with your B2B clients, don't talk about your products. Get active on social media. I'm talking paid, I'm talking, you know, organic. I'm talking about your SMEs and executives getting involved and reaching out and sharing content and reaching out to prospects and clients with a piece of content or a Calendly link or something like that. Involving your clients, test stuff by them, run stuff by them before you send it out to everybody. You know, a new website, a new piece of content, a new ad, a new logo, a new website design. You know, start a little voice of customer program with 10 to 12 clients. You know, get their feedback first, involve them, give them a loud voice. And then if you have partners, definitely leverage them. A lot of times, you know, we have partners now and they have so many things that we can leverage to co-brand, to co-author, to co-host a webinar. So there's a lot of different things that you can do quickly to create that awareness and start developing affinity for your brand.
All right, thank you. Okay, now I'm gonna get through this one in record time. So giving your brand an upgrade or a refresh, there's different sources out there, and some say 3, some say 5. I'm going to go with 3, at least in my experience that I've seen in different categories. So there's brand refresh, there's a merger, and there's a full rebrand. So what are the differences? A brand refresh is the brand. It's like you're fixing up your house and not entirely tearing it down, right? So your brand isn't changing entirely, but it's part of a natural evolution. Going back to what I said earlier, it's done to reflect how the brand is evolving with the times, and it's an adjustment to current assets. So one great example of that is MasterCard, right? So I think everybody remembers MasterCard's logo on the left from the 80s and the 90s, and that was back when credit cards were like, right? And so the one on the right is what their current logo looks right now, and it's trying to reflect that they're a more modern company and that they're giving their customers more options in terms of online banking, right? So that's a brand refresh. A brand merger is kind of like what I call a mixed marriage, right? Because it's two companies from two completely different cultures and ways of working sometimes coming together, and they need to find that common ground. And as a result of that merger, they create an identity to reflect that change. And there's so many examples out there, but I decided to go with this one. In North America, I think everybody remembers Kinko's. That's the place you used to go to have stuff printed out. And then there's FedEx. So FedEx bought over Kinko's, and it started out with FedEx and Kinko's. And they had that little asterisk on the upper right-hand side to reflect it screams like inkjet toner, right? Like printing. And now they've gotten rid of the Kinko's, and it's just called FedEx Office, right? The full rebrand is the whole enchilada, right? Because this requires a significant amount of change in the organization. And this happens when there's a new product or service or a change in the business model, and it reflects, the rebrand reflects how the brand and the organization will address that change. So one great example in the world of B2B is MailChimp, right? I don't know if you guys remember, MailChimp started out as an email marketing service, right? And it gradually evolved to 2019 to be this all-in-one marketing platform, right? But for some reason, and this is going back to brand loyalty and doing the brand perception study, they found out that customers easily associate this company with email. So they decided to retain that name, right? So even though they're doing all this other stuff, they still kept the name MailChimp, right? And they had this campaign slogan that says more than mail, right? So it's to indicate that they've changed, right? So I think we're down to like 1 minute or 50 seconds. So I'm just gonna like quickly run through this, run like I stole something. So measuring results, right? I'm not gonna go into this in too much detail, but of course it's important to measure the results of all these initiatives that you're rolling out. And there's a great article by a platform called Qualtrics. It's very consumer focused, so I've carefully sifted out what I thought was relevant to B2B. So of course, the level of brand awareness that you can determine, the brand attributes and associations. So that's basically like, okay, the thoughts and opinions that customers link to your brand. Perceived quality versus what you as an organization actually deliver. Brand loyalty. So, and that comes from things like customer service and customer care. So that's also important to get the feedback from the salespeople to see their interactions with customers and what their experience is like. Item number 5 is one that CX and CS practitioners love to use. So the Net Promoter Score, NPS. So that's something like, okay, on a scale of 1 to 10, how likely are you to recommend our company, right? And website metrics and social media marketing metrics. So I'm just going to name a few here, but looking at things like the total site traffic, bounce rate, the average duration on page for websites, right? Interactions per visits, and then for social media, shares, comments, and the like. And one that I added, this wasn't in the Qualtrics article, qualitative feedback. So asking things like, for example, if the salespeople jump on a discovery call with a prospect, how did you find out about us? How did you learn about us, right? So these are, some of these things are, it's not easy to measure them. It's not really directly attributable. Nevertheless, it's still important to get that input, right? So that's the, and this is an entirely different webinar, but it's dark, like for example, everyone's talking about dark social, right? So it's going back to those, like what are the conversations that people are having in Slack channels and DMs? These are things that you cannot use tools and technology to track, right? So those are some of the things that we would measure in terms of the results for brand building initiatives. So I'd like to thank everybody for their patience and for sitting through all this. Oh yeah, sorry. One more thing. Think about the metrics before starting a project. Don't roll it out and then, okay, well, how should we measure this? Have that from the get-go, right? Thank you, everybody.
Awesome. That was great, you guys. I know that was a lot, and to condense down into 1 hour your decades of experience. So I appreciate the effort, and I hope that people got something out of this in terms of, especially for marketers, that it's really our job to keep things consistent. And I think a lot of people, at least when I hear branding, I grew up in consumer marketing. Then I switched over to B2B, and there was always a separate branding department. And so the attitude was, well, I don't own the brand. That's a different department. But actually, all of us as marketers and salespeople, we own the brand. We're brand ambassadors. And it's really our job to make sure that it shows up consistently in how we want it to be in the market. And that I think I love the idea of the pulse check, because marketing uses a lot of, or is accused of using a lot of fluffy words and aspirational statements. And I think that's a really solid way to really validate, is what we're saying true and accurate and reflected in the thoughts and opinions and feelings of our customers.
Sorry, Stacey, are you accusing us marketers of using fluffy words? There's no such thing.
No, I'm not.
Yeah.
Yes, so thank you, and we'll send out a recap of this and links to your LinkedIn, and really appreciate everybody joining. And I think, Alex, did you want to drop we have a survey, just a quick sort of 1 or 2 question survey, if you guys wouldn't mind providing us with some feedback. We're trying to make our events better as well. So would love your insight.
Oh, Stacey, I'm sorry. I'm just reading your message now. Are you guys on track? My bad.
Yes, you did a great job. So thank you. Is there any questions that anybody else has? I mean, in our final 30 seconds or so.
Or you can connect with us on LinkedIn or in the Soar Marketing platform. I should have started with Soar Marketing first. Excuse me.
Yeah.
Connect with us on Soar Marketing, and then we can continue the conversation from there.
Perfect. All right. Appreciate it, everybody. Thank you so much for joining.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
All right.
Take care.
Bye.
Okay.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Bye-bye.